Welcome back. We're going to get started with this next panel, which it's my pleasure to introduce. This is about the future of the American worker. I think a lot of us have heard this term probably too many times over the past decade, right, about the future of work, and I think that conjures up different images for different people, right? A lot of people might think about scary robots and automation. Some people think about care work, and I think that's rightfully so as well, because from my perspective, a lot of the future of work is care work. And then increasingly, I think people are also starting to think about the future of work and as it relates to onshoring and reshoring of manufacturing. But whatever image it kind of conjures up from your perspective, I think we're all here in part because we're worried about the future of work and the future of the American worker in particular in this context. It's a shared concern. You know, we've seen decades of wage stagnation. We've seen rising inequality, the decline of unionization and workers' bargaining power, the rise of temporary and non-standard labor arrangements and gig work. There's just been a lot working against working people over the last few decades. And, you know, just in recent years, you know, there's even more cause for concern, and in the past few months in particular, because we're starting to debate some of the things I think a lot of us thought we were in agreement on, right? There's this renewed debate around child labor, around whether we need an occupational safety and health administration, whether we should be enforcing discrimination laws in the workplace. So we're here today to kind of unpack some of those issues and talk about what employee ownership maybe can help solve for and maybe what it can't help solve for, but kind of discussing what role employee ownership can play in creating the future of work, which I think we all want to see, which is one that's built on shared prosperity and really human dignity. So it's my pleasure to introduce this great panel that we have. I'm going to start down there on the far right with Chris Griswold, who's the policy director at American Compass. Chris was with us yesterday and is back again pulling double duty for us. Next to Chris, we have Audrey Powell, who's president and CEO of Cooperative Home Care Associates. Audrey's colleague, Juan Carlos, was on our employee owner panel yesterday and really knocked it out of the park, so we're glad to have him there too. Next to Audrey, we have Zav de Souza Briggs. He is senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. And next to Zav, we have Michael Quarry, who is vice president of corporate development at Web Industries. At the end of today's panel, we're going to invite up Christos Makritis. Christos is an associate professor at Arizona State University, amongst many hats that he wears, and he'll provide some closing reflections. But guiding today's conversation, we're so grateful and privileged to have Emma Goldberg from the New York Times. She's a business writer at the Times, where she reports on cultural, societal, and economic change. She looks at the cultural and economic shifts affecting how we live and work. She's covered so much during her time there and has just a wide breadth of expertise, ranging from things like coverage on the workplace, reporting on generational shifts at work. I think she had a health and medical beat for a while. She's written a book called Life on the Line, Young Doctors Coming of Age in a Pandemic. And we're just really grateful to have Emma here to help guide this conversation. So I'll turn it over to her.
Can you guys hear me? Yes. Okay. Well, this is an amazing group of panelists, so I'm extremely excited to be here for this conversation. And I wanted to start out just by saying, I think in particular in a week like this, when news about the economy feels so head-spinning, it's all the more important to carve out space for big picture visioning about economic change, but also about economic change that amplifies the voices of workers and takes their experiences into account. And everyone on this panel is someone who has been at the forefront of doing that thinking and doing that work about building economic models and worker models that support workers' experiences and amplify their voices. So I think this is going to be a really wonderful conversation. Audrey, I wanted to start with you because you run the largest worker-owned cooperative in the country, And it is in a sector that, as Matt was saying, when we think about what is the future of work, it is care work. It's one of the fastest growing parts of the economy and one of the most complex where it comes to workers' experiences, because there's so much people are vulnerable to, from exploitation to, low wages. So I wanted you to tell us a little bit about your work. And I asked you this before, but if you could just give us a little bit of color on what does being part of the largest worker-owned co-op in the country look like for the day-to-day experience of workers? What does that mean for their job quality?
So thank you, Emma. I'm really pleased and excited to be here. Good morning, everyone. So yes, my name is Adria Powell, and I, for the last 8 years, have been the president and CEO of Cooperative Home Care Associates. Though I've been connected to the cooperative for a very long time. My mother was one of the original founders of the cooperative, and so I've been there pretty much since the beginning. But Cooperative Home Care Associates is a 40-year-old workforce development training and home care provider based in New York State. And so we basically train workers to go in the community and serve people who have disabilities and have chronic conditions so that they can stay in those communities. And we do that in like a really innovative way in terms of investing in the workforce and investing in the job quality. And I think, Emma, you talk about the future of care work. And it is. Care work is, I think, universal, and home care and long-term care in particular. I just want to lift up a quote that Rosalind Carter said. There are 4 kinds of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. So it's a universal experience that will happen, and it's really important that we do this right, because we're in a time in our country where we have people aging at a staggering, mind-blowing rate, and at the same time, we don't have people who can care for them because we have not invested in these jobs, and we're facing the largest crisis in terms of workforce because we have not invested in these jobs. And so at CHCA, we try to do it a different way. We look to see how can we get higher wages, make sure that workers have benefits, invest in training, have career advancement opportunities within the sector, and sort of wrap that in a culture of ownership by being a worker-owned cooperative, and having the workers really centered and on the board and involved in decision-making. And when I think about it, Emma asked me to talk about a story. And I want to bring one of our workers into the room, who is a woman who came from the Dominican Republic. She moved to the US, and she was leaving a situation in which she was experiencing domestic violence. She moved to this country with her 2 young children, started working first in a factory, because that was the work that she could get. It was horrible. Obviously, she couldn't earn a lot of money. There's all kinds of exploitation, similar to things that go on in the home care sector. And then she found our training program, and she took our 4-week program, was certified as a home care worker, was prepared to go into the field and deliver essential services, and has worked with CHCA for 30 years, has served on the board, is one of our biggest advocates when we go lobbying about why these jobs matter and why we need to invest in them. And she talks about coming to cooperative and being part of cooperative home care really changed her life and her children's lives. So yeah, that's...
Wow, it's amazing to hear what it means for a worker to actually move through that experience and how that can transform their working conditions. So if anyone in this room has flown on an airplane or taken a COVID rapid test, you might have experienced the products of the workforce at Webb. And so we have Michael here to tell us a little bit about being part of this company that has been in ESOP since 1985, fully since 2000. But what I want Michael to also talk a little bit about is that Web went through a period of crisis, if it's fair to call it that, during the early days of COVID, and weathered that really impressively. And so I wanted to hear a little bit about what was it like when the pandemic hit web, and what did the employee ownership model mean for how your company was able to weather that challenge?
Yeah, so Web Industries, we're a manufacturing company. We make products that are made from flexible materials, and you don't often think of an airplane as being made of flexible materials unless you know this, but in fact, the large twin-aisle planes these days are actually made from very thin and very narrow tapes of carbon fibers that are embedded in an epoxy resin, and these tapes are unwound around a big model of a plane, like 80 layers thick, and they go in an oven and get cooked, and out comes a super lightweight, super strong plane. And this is part of the business that Web is in. We're also in
You won't be tested on that
baby
later.
diapers and garbage bags, and it turns out medical devices that are also made from little strips, like a diabetes test strip is a laminate of many layers and so on. So in the early 2000s through about 2020, our business was growing very rapidly as Boeing and Airbus adopted this technology for their largest twin-aisle aircraft. And that was wonderful for Web, certainly, and for our employee owners, until March of 2020 and shutdowns and people stopped traveling, and everybody thinks that's going to be a couple of months. And then as that lingers, all of a sudden, not only are the airlines in crisis, but they're not buying airplanes, and our business dropped in that largest part of our company by about 90%. And that's obviously something that's any company would find challenging. We were really lucky that our medical device business we were the only contract manufacturing company in the United States making what we used to call lateral flow immunoassays, but we now all know of as like a rapid test, right? And Becton Dickinson came to us and said, would you make all our COVID tests for North America? And we were really excited about that, and we had to pivot. We're in 8 locations around the world, and this was a operation that we had in Massachusetts that had 50 employees. And from the time we got that inquiry in April to getting qualified by the FDA in June, starting production in July, we began pivoting and ramping our medical device business as we were ramping down our aerospace business, our global aerospace business. That plant went from 50 to 650 people over the course of 6 months. We started shipping in July. We were shipping 1 million tests a week in November and 2 million tests a week in February. So it was this extraordinary transformation. Our German employees, so our international employees can't be in the ESOP, but we create plans that mirror the ESOP that include our international employees. And our German employee owners, during COVID, pre-vaccine, got on airplanes, moved to hotels in Massachusetts, away from their families during this crazy medical global crisis, and ran our 3rd shift, making tests. Our corporate office employees would work in Marlborough, right down the street from this plant, during the day and do their accounting and finance and legal work and whatever, and then would come and work at night and pack COVID tests. Family members of our employees would show up and pack, I know I'm an expert, and I was Station 5 in the kitting line. And in Station 5, my job was to take a bunch of swabs and put them in the kit, right? Like just over and over and over again all night long. I was very good. That was the only station that I was allowed to do. But put me on another station. It wasn't a good outcome. But this is what, like, when it's your business, when your company is at stake, when your company won't be there if you don't do this, this is what happens, right? So our business was saved in this crisis by the fact that we had a great employee ownership culture.
Right. It's a lot easier to ask someone to fly across the world and pivot what they're doing when they're an employee owner, it sounds like.
Yeah, it wasn't just to make, Mr. Webb. There was no Mr. Webb, but it wasn't just to make Mr. Webb.
We're all Mr. Webb.
We're all Mr. Webb, exactly, right? It was for everyone's benefit.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Zav, you have written about a really incredible range of aspects of how the economy is transforming, including generative AI and the 30% or so of jobs that it could transform, gig work, the minimum wage, so many different economic topics. Can you tell us a little bit about your recent research and how employee ownership fits into the work you've been doing on job quality?
Sure. Emma, thanks for the question, and thanks to Aspen and Rutgers for having me. A couple of things stand out for me, and I'll just weave in a little bit of where the research is pointing, as you said. Number one, the movement for job quality, thank you to my friends at Aspen for being such an important part of that, the good job champions and so on. I'm going to put it this way. The movement to improve the quality of work, not just maximize the number of jobs in our economy, has been quietly winning. And the quietly part has actually been a positive in many ways, because it's not hyper-partisan chum, and may it not become that, please. But as one example of this, the minimum wage movement has been winning, including in the Deep South. Latest election, you may remember, Missouri, also up in Alaska. Prior election, Florida, by a significantly greater margin than President Trump won in that state. I could give you other examples. That tells us something. A very, very broad base of voters and taxpayers is literally voting for job quality, right, in important ways. At the same time, major labor reform in this country of the kind advocates have sought for a long time is not on the horizon for the foreseeable, at least not at the national level. States are a different story, and they have lots of labor muscle and labor power and lots of power to affect change. The other thing that's going on that we're doing a lot of work on, has been mentioned a few times so far this morning, is industrial strategy, industrial policy. We know that the big drivers are not, sorry for all of us who've been promoting a different kind of paradigm for the economy, they're not sort of, it's time to rewrite the rules because it's just and it's about human dignity. The drivers are national security, number one, and national competitiveness, number two, and in particular the foot race with China. Right? These are the things that drove the CHIPS and Science Act over the line, for example, on a strongly bipartisan basis, and other things as well. And in that context, what I would highlight is the bets on the future, if you will, are amazing, and they are incredibly important at the regional level, including in regions that need to revitalize. They've been looking for their next economic engine for a long time. Central upstate New York, the Syracuse area, and many others I could name for you, outside Columbus, Cleveland. But this push to promote excellence in industry and quote unquote own advanced industries and sort of win the future, economic nationalism, if you will, it is putting a bright spotlight on all kinds of unfinished business. I mean, our workforce development system is not what it should be. We should not be in the 21st century using phrases like train and pray. That's gone from being a joke to being a national disgrace. We just do not perform at a level that we should. We're way behind the other advanced economies in doing that. So, these big bets, this strategy is putting a bright light on that and the need and opportunity to change that. And my advice to regions across the country is don't wait for the federal government to come and save you. And I'm not saying that about this current political moment. I'm saying that's been true for quite a while. You need to show what it looks like to lead. And if anything, the federal government will follow you. And you can show what you need in the way of enabling support. I'll be very brief about generative AI. I know we'll get a chance to get a bit deeper into it, but we looked at 1,000 occupations in the American economy, everything you can think of, screenwriter, plumber, care worker, neurologist, architect, finance professional. The most exposed to AI disruption are the least unionized. That will not surprise you. So mostly white-collar jobs, right, who've been spared a lot of the prior waves of automation, or at least spared the worst effects of, the most serious disruptions. The public sector is an important exception. It's more highly unionized. If you ask me to bet, I would say healthcare and public education are probably the two industries or the two sectors with the most promise right now to show us what good looks like in the deployment of AI to make work better, to minimize disruptions and harms, and to create value for customers, for the economy, and ensure good jobs in a very different kind of future. But it won't just happen. We have to create that future, and we're moving too slowly. And I'd say the country as a whole, this is true of regions as well, it's true of organizations as well, are by and large not AI ready, and they're underestimating how rapidly this technology is evolving, and just how far its disruptive effects will go. And I'll end on that bright thought.
Thank you so much for that very cheery thought. Chris, I am also really excited that we have you on this panel. You've done such fascinating research on worker voices. You had a great paper a few years ago on declining trust in institutions across the board, and particularly what that means for the workplace and how we can help workers feel a sense of agency and voice in their jobs and in their work. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what launched that research, and then also right now in this moment of economic flux, what you're seeing as some of the possibilities emerging of changes that can be made to boost workers' voices and to give workers more of a sense of agency in their jobs.
Yeah, thank you so much. I guess for me, the starting premise of this conversation is the demonstrable fact that the American worker feels disenfranchised. And any of you all that have worked with me, you know that's my hobby horse. I'm sorry to keep beating that drum, but it's true, and it's important to start there, I think, just with the fundamental fact that American workers feel voiceless. And if you ask them if they feel that way, they will tell you they do. There is a measurable, what Thomas Cochin at MIT calls just voice gap, between the voice workers say they want at work and the voice they understand themselves to actually have at work. And it's about, wages and benefits primarily, but not just about that. It's about across a whole range of issues where workers wish they had more agency and voice in the workplace on how they're treated, what their employer's value system is and how they express it, on the adoption of new technology, which I'm sure we'll get into. Across this whole range, there's this massive voice gap. And that has, to your really big picture question, that has enormous political consequences, and I think is one of the drivers of the populisms of the left and right that are ascendant. And honestly, ascendant for good reason, because people are desperate to find a new avenue into enfranchisement. I think that's right. And so the voicelessness that I'm describing, in my view, is a function of the economic model that we've been pursuing in this country for at least several decades. Call it neoliberalism, call it free market fundamentalism, call it what you want, but this obsession with market efficiency, this obsession with the idea that allowing the market to optimize will produce what is best for society and for the people in it. That's what we've been doing. And it hasn't worked well, in my opinion, for working people. And all of us, I think it's true for all of anyone who has a job, is fully aware of what economic model they're participating in and what that model has to say about who you are. And in this model, if you're a working person, the message you are receiving and being told loud and very clearly is that you are a widget, you are a unit of production, you are a factor input of production to be economized and subject to efficiency measures and laid off and downsized and outsourced and offshored where possible, as opposed to being a co-creator of economic value, which is what workers actually are, along with management, along with capital. So that's the message we're sending. It has political consequences. It also has economic consequences, just a bad way to do economics, in my opinion, because workers really do have something important to say. You see that in innovation, and in the context of just the last week, and debates about global trade and the right and wrong ways to try and reindustrialize the country. One of the points that's being made rightly by people on both sides of the aisle is that trying to design things here and make them elsewhere doesn't work, because you lose that innovative capacity over time. Innovation, and I appreciate your point, Station 5, right? So much insight happens on the floor, on the factory floor. That's where so much of the seat of our industrial commons, of our shared industrial knowledge comes from. And so that's a broken model. Workers have something to contribute. So what does that all mean? It means that I think the most promising political leaders at the moment are those who are trying to offer new models of giving workers voice and say in the workplace. And we could spend all day kind of talking about the whole menu of things that are out there. Obviously, trade is one of them. Labor policy is quite obviously one of them. I maybe have a little more hope than you at the national level. I won't say it's likely, but I do think there are seeds of hope. There are multiple reasons for the decline of organized labor. Part of it is a legal regime that's hostile to it. You see Senator Josh Hawley and the Teamsters Union working now on a labor framework to punish employers who abuse our current labor system. Never have seen that kind of alliance from a leading Republican and a leading labor union in decades. I think it's very heartening. And he's bringing some fellow Republicans along with him. I think on the left you see openness to maybe depoliticizing unions, to open their appeal to a wider scope of potential members. So there's a lot going on, and I think employee ownership needs to be part of the conversation, because it's such an elegant way of communicating and in fact making true the idea that we are in this together, and that this is a shared enterprise, and that you are not just a factor of production, you are a co-creator of value, and this is in fact your enterprise. And I just, part of my hope in this moment is that employee ownership kind of takes its rightful place alongside some of these bigger political conversations as part of the solution.
I want to stay with you for a minute, because that issue of worker voice is so critical. I speak with a lot of workers about their feelings on the rollout of AI in their companies, and just what I hear across so many industries is fear, and also a sense of voicelessness of, the AI is coming in, being thrown into the workplace without a lot of conversation with workers about how they want to see it implemented into their jobs, and how they want to be trained to use it. And so I wondered if you could stay on that topic for a little bit. What does amplifying worker voice and giving workers a sense of agency specifically look like where it comes to rollout and implementation of new technologies? And also, how do you see employee ownership fitting into that conversation?
Yeah, well, I think it's a bunch of things, but let's focus in on the broad kind of labor movement question. I think we need a more robust labor movement in the country that will help. But I think, and the longshoreman dispute is a really interesting case study on this, where the longshoremen had enough power to potentially disrupt our import system to try and protect their jobs and resist the potential automation of those jobs. That is good for those workers. I'm glad they won, but it is also indicative of the problem that emerges when workers and technology are perceived to be in conflict with each other. Because the other side of that story is that we really do need to embrace advanced manufacturing. When you're talking about reindustrialization, we're not talking about the jobs of times gone by. We're talking about leading industrial processes. That's what we should be doing. And one of the consequences of automating and embracing productivity-enhancing technology is that you might need fewer people in that given factory, and that's not a bad thing. On the national economic scale, that's what we should be doing. So you have this tension, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday, so I apologize for repeating the point, but you have this tension between workers who rightly want to resist being replaced and an economic imperative that we embrace the best manufacturing processes we can. And one of the ways we might be able to square the circle on that is just not to accept that dichotomy of workers as an input factor in competition with other input factors.
Chris, could I just jump in
Please,
and say,
yes.
I know employee owners, I could name employee owners who love robots because robots will work all night and they don't take any profit sharing.
Yes. No, and honestly, I defer to you and your expertise on this, but the research that I've seen suggests exactly that if employees have a stake, and if employees relate to the enterprise in a different way, they're not only okay, but enthusiastic about some of this technology. And it doesn't have to lead to layoffs. It can lead to just enjoying the fruits of more productivity. We can do more stuff now. Or maybe we get to like slightly reduce the workload and spend time with families in a way that increases employee satisfaction and makes them more loyal to the business. I mean, like, there's the set of assumptions that we bring into how this has to work. I don't think it's not the only option set available, and so I really appreciate the point.
I see you nodding, Michael. Is there anything you can share from your firsthand experience of seeing how employee ownership affects the rollout and implementation of new technologies, and particularly worker voice in that process?
Yeah, so there are a whole bunch of connections here, of course, right? So I love this. We've had a lot of conversation over the last 2 days. And Chris, you're making me think about like the danger of everything being financialized, right? That and even enthusiastic supporters of employee ownership, like, I want to get up and talk about how many millionaires we've created or how much more our ESOP accounts are than the average 401k, and they're great numbers. Related to that, in your question, we spend a lot of time at Web structuring employee voice, right? So the way to get the competitive advantage, to maximize the competitive advantage that employee ownership can give you, is to create systems and structures for a high engagement culture. That's been our mantra at Web for decades. So we have all of these very formal programs where everyone, for example, is involved in an ideas team every week. And we count not the financial benefit of the ideas, but how many ideas we implement. And you can implement an idea in your department, and you can spend money without any approval and so on. And we've got like 4 or 5 highly structured ways that we create employee voice. And we find then that people are out adopting technology and looking for improvements and driving improvements, but they're not all of these ideas, and I think this gets to your point, they're not always the ones we celebrate and they're exciting. People are finding ways that, and they'll talk about, oh, I see this idea every day that when I come in and I see it, I know it saved $25,000 a year, and I feel really proud about that. But not all the ideas are financial. They may be safety. They may be just about the quality of work, right? We are more than financial creatures. And one of the wonderful things about employee ownership is that it creates the opportunity to make our companies more whole, more human. So anyway, that's my thought about that. So we embrace technology and we're more human, right, in the process.
Interesting. Zav, could you talk a little bit about what lessons can be learned from the rise of the gig economy in thinking about worker experiences and worker voices in periods of economic transformation?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot to learn from efforts by the Workers Lab, by other organizations to engage with gig workers across a tremendous spectrum, to understand their lives, their work, their ideas for making work better. I'm just echoing everyone here on the panel when I underscore that. I have to add, though, I also see it from the perspective of job quality as something of a failure example so far. Many worker advocates chose to approach the gig platforms, Uber and the other big ones, as fundamentally controlling the classification of workers, right, as independent contractors versus employees. Does this sound familiar? Whether you were touching it directly or you were following it in your community or in the news, major ballot measures in California and then a counter ballot measure by the other side. And and big, expensive political fights over that regulatory question. It's an important question, but to some extent, the genie was already out of the bottle. I mean, consumers and small businesses and others really value gig work of many kinds, and we don't have something like a gig workers' bill of rights, a meaningful one, in America. A couple of states have made some headway. So, you know, gig work in our recent past and in our present is also a cautionary tale about how to approach the issue of job quality. And by and large, it did not engage with what everyone has said here on the panel so far. Number one, organized labor does have a role to play, and I don't mean to shortchange it. I 1,000% agree with Chris. We have the screenwriters and their amazing example a little over a year ago, negotiating a landmark deal that includes AI. And I love it, and we wrote it up. I also have to say, those are unusual workers. They have access to a union. They negotiated with all the major studios at one time. Almost no worker in America is in that sort of position, so-called sectoral bargaining, right, which is much more the European way. But there are lessons in what they created. The AFL has a technology institute. It's encouraging labor management partnerships. It's making the case that we're making today about AI especially and new technologies. But it's not going far enough in my view, and I'm not critiquing labor as I say this. Employee ownership strikes me as an enormously powerful and timely mechanism for the reasons we're exploring today. First, Chris is right. There's the innovation case for it. Workers are far more worried about losing their jobs or having work downgraded and losing wages or losing hours than they are, by the way, about privacy and surveillance and the other things that have gotten way more attention in the AI space, for example. Those are important concerns too, obviously. But workers are far more concerned about their core livelihoods and their ability to survive these coming transitions. They feel like their employers are not talking to them. They feel that it's sort of going to be rolled out in a stealthy way, and they're suddenly going to find themselves without opportunity, and they're very afraid of that. In that context, engaging worker voice to improve deployment, informed by the lessons of the world's leading manufacturers. I mean, the Japanese were much quicker to adopt this approach than we were, the workers' councils, the quality circles, all of that. There's also the local economic development opportunity in this. I'm thrilled that we have a panel this afternoon on small business. That's where a lot of the conversation also lives when you go regional with this. And finally, the investment opportunity. I spent a number of years doing impact investing, both in my days in government and what I call the prehistory of impact investing, so government as a de-risker, government credit programs of many kinds, and when I served at the Ford Foundation. And, you know, as you look across asset classes with different sort of levels of risk and return and whatnot, it's not as though you have that many that can absorb a lot of capital that have a crystal clear, easy to explain, unequivocal social return, namely the impact on workers' lives and the quality of work, along with a financial return, right? So that positions this, I would say, given the scale it already has and the quality of the evidence that's getting better and better with all the research we hear about, positions it in a way that's really attractive from an investment point of view. And I'm glad that we're going to have a conversation this afternoon to sort of look at the frontier of that and where that can go.
Thank you so much for that. Audrey, I think people are sometimes surprised by just how exposed home care, healthcare, and all care work is to technology as well, and how much those jobs are already being transformed, including by AI and generative AI. And you are daily and weekly in conversation with workers. Can you tell us a little bit about what it looks like when workers' voices are part of decision-making processes around technology in your sector?
Sure. I'll start with the fact that technology and AI really should be about supporting workers and the care that they're delivering to the clients. You're not going to replace home care workers with robots in the home. It's not going to happen. But what should happen is ways in which it can help facilitate the home care worker delivering the care that the client needs in their home. And I think for us in our organization, it's really everything centers around the fact that we need to recruit and retain home care workers for this job. And the way to do that is through job quality. So the investments that we make really are around getting people getting the workforce to be involved in the decision making in the cooperative. When we're rolling out training programs, beta testing it with the home care workforce and getting the feedback from them about how these programs are working, how they're, what do they need in order to deliver better care to their clients. I think we also are reliant on the home care workers and the board members to promote CHCA and to be involved. We do a lot of initiatives around worker appreciation. We do things that help them feel connected to the organization and to the work that they're doing and feel valued and respected.
Thank you so much for that. I know we are running out the clock a little bit, but you all have so many interesting insights to share. I wanted to go to you, Michael, to hear a little bit about, there's a chapter 2 to the story you started out this panel with about how employee ownership has played a role in the crises that Web has weathered. I know it's meant facing some challenges, and I was wondering if you could tell us about how Web has faced recent turbulence in its manufacturing.
Yeah, life isn't as simple as we'd like it to be with just a happy ending, right? So this pivot in the organization, saving the business by making COVID tests, obviously that was a roller coaster in and of itself. It did let us bridge the gap from like making no airplanes to the beginning of an aerospace recovery. But that recovery isn't full yet. We're only at about half the rate of production in commercial aviation that we were in 2020, even though the demand is there. And we had built this wonderful business with a lot of promise. You know, imagine a world where we could walk down to the drugstore this afternoon and pick up a rapid test and see if we have cancer, or if we, have AIDS, or if we have whatever, right? Those tests are coming. They were all in our pipeline. We had an amazing pipeline, but we had no business in our medical manufacturing operation. And after building this wonderful team and saving an employee-owned company, we weren't successful enough in the recovery of the rest of our business to keep that business open. And in 2023, we closed the business. We offered jobs to anyone who would move. We moved part of the business to another nearby plant, but ultimately there were layoffs in that business. And I think if I just try to tie together some of what we've been talking about, right, the way that played out in an organization where we had a real, genuine, amazing culture of employee ownership, where people worked so closely together in high-performance teams, had pulled off such a tremendous, amazing result. When they all knew what was happening, they all had helped build this pipeline, they could see that it was too far away to come to reality. And the day that I stood up in a room like this and said that we were going to close the business, what I asked is, over the next few months as we wind it down and then you have your severance, can we still love each other, right? Like, it wasn't just about the money. And that's what we did, right? And I think that's what life is too, right? It isn't always a field of dreams. So anyway, that's chapter 2. Now, chapter 3 is we're diversifying the business. Like we have 550 employee owners who are very focused on not being so dependent on one or two market segments. And my corporate development role exists now, and we've got this really, for a different panel, great process for how we're going to diversify the business and not get in that situation again.
And how does employee ownership fit into that?
Well, so we pull people out of we have this cool process where we pull people out of their jobs for a 90-day market development sprint. And, and we have a nice little structured process, and we say, hey, go out into the world and learn everything you can, talk to everybody at every point in the supply chain in this market, figure out what the needs are, how might a company like Web fit those needs, and come back with a little mini business case we've done 7 of those in the last year. 3 of them are in implementation. One of them is generating revenue. Several of them, I mean, they're the kinds of things that we're finding things that will be, 20, 30, 40% of the size of the whole company in the next decade. So we're sending owners out into the world, right? Like, these are young entrepreneurs. They own the business. They're having a ball doing it. They're learning a lot. So it's very much connected to the idea of high engagement culture.
Fascinating. Since we're talking about looking forward, Adria, can you tell us, being in one of the corners of the economy that's growing the fastest, what can care workers across the country learn from looking at CHCA's model?
So first, I want to follow up because Michael said twice this piece about it's not all about financial, and I think that is so important to underscore in home care because there is no money in home care. Like, we're not going to have home care workers that are getting dividends, in the tens of thousands of dollars, although we're actually going to be able to give a dividend this year, which we haven't been able to do in a long time. So I'm really, really excited about that, yeah. But it just makes it so much more important to center the job around the workers and have them feel valued and really the core of the organization. We're fortunate enough to be working with a researcher and a primary care doctor who is helping us to really identify what are the main ingredients and the key ingredients of the cooperative difference. And, the themes that are emerging, not surprisingly, are things like community, feeling, a culture of respect, being valued, compensation, even when we don't have the ability to, pay extraordinary amounts. The fact that we are consistently trying to find ways to increase wages for the workforce, to, have benefits for the workforce. Those things come through in the cooperative, the difference of what leads to workers feeling valued so that they can go out and deliver quality care. The home care cooperatives also have things like better retention rates. So when you look at CHCA and other home care cooperatives, the conventional agencies have turnover rates that are somewhere just a little north of 80%. Can you imagine 80% of the workforce being turned over compared to worker cooperative numbers at like 30%? You can leave that down there. So if we have 30% turnover, we have people in the job, staying in the jobs, right? That means that we have less of a workforce shortage. We can bring more people in and retain them longer. And that has an impact on the client's care as well. You have the continuity of the worker knowing this person. I'm thinking about the work that this researcher was doing with us, and one of the quotes that a home care worker said was, feeling like the organization has her back, right? She's like, one of the things that's really important in terms of feeling like a community is that I feel like my organization has my back. If something happens in the client's home, they're going to have my back. And I think that's so important, that workers feel like we have their back and are not standing on their backs,
Yeah, each other's backs.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely.
So both of you just brought up this point about, it's not just about the money, and you brought up turnover. Chris, right now, there's obviously a lot of talk about efficiency, what sometimes also talk about what that means for workers. Can you just reflect a little bit about how employee ownership fits into the current policymaking discourse and where you see the cracks where it could sort of fit in?
Yeah, I love this question because it lets me talk about Elon Musk. I wrote a piece in the fall about why I thought if President Trump was reelected, he should not appoint Elon to a government efficiency panel. I was not heated, and the argument I was making is that efficiency is a dangerous word in the current political climate because it's used to mean more than one thing, and people play fast and loose with which meaning they're using at any given time. If by efficiency, at least let's talk about the government context first, then we talk about business. If by that you mean eliminating fraudulent payments and duplicative, operations, and of course, no sane person of goodwill disagrees with that. Everyone's on board with that. But what we often actually mean by the term is this market fundamentalist idea that the most efficient thing you can do is get out of the market's way, let it optimize as it will, and that will be best. Even Adam Smith didn't believe that. That is not what he meant by the invisible hand, for what it's worth. We could have a whole sidebar about that anytime. But the function of the market is not to be gotten out of the way of. It is to support and promote human thriving. And that is a fundamental, just a tremendously important shift from, again, this economic model and the philosophy undergirding that model that we've been pursuing for the last several decades. And the American public is quite clearly very, very hungry for that. So when politicians come out and say, at long last, like, we're not an economy with a country, we're a country with an economy, economies should serve us, not us serving the market, that is really important. And efficiency, I think it gets deployed because everyone agrees with the common sense meaning of that word. I think it gets deployed in this other way very effectively. And you see the destruction that Elon has wreaked on our state capacity, for example, as a result of a misuse of the idea of, in my opinion, of the idea of efficiency. If you believe that the purpose of the market is to support human thriving, then you can't treat workers, you can only treat workers a certain set of ways, and you can't treat them another set of ways. And one of the implications of that, again, is that they are co-creators of value. And so if the question is like, what policy frameworks can support economic models that affirm that, well, employee ownership is quite clearly one of them. And is, again, I think, a special one because of the efficiency with which it communicates the point that we are all in this together, that this is a shared endeavor, and that you matter beyond just the, again, like the kind of financialized, unitized, view of traditional economics.
Thank you so much for that. Do we have time for an audience question? This was such a rich conversation. Does anyone in the audience have questions? Yes.
So I have a question for Audria. You had mentioned that as an employee-owned cooperative, you have much lower rates of turnover within your company, which then results in better care for your customers. Can you also comment on whether or not that has improved your succession planning and the growth of the company in the future, maybe creating a stronger base for the future?
The fact that we have the lower turnover rates really means that we have a lot of tenure in terms of our workforce, and we have a lot of historical knowledge. And so when new workers, whether they're coming into the office or whether they're coming in through the training program to become home care workers and deliver the care, you pass that knowledge along. And so then the next group that is coming in, we're able to hold on to them because they feel like they're connected and committed to the organization. Like I said, I've been there since like the beginning, but even on like my senior leadership team, we've got folks who have 20 years in, and then we have the next set of, JC's one of our managers, and JC has like 15 years. And then there's people behind, the next layer. And work to do different kinds of trainings and support so that we continue to make sure that folks understand the importance of the qualities that lead, or importance of the investments that lead to people feeling that they're valued and they're connected and stay in the jobs.
Great question. Do we have time for one more?
Probably go to Christos.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. That was an amazing conversation. I feel like this group really came at this from every different perspective and every level of experience. So this was really fascinating, and I learned a lot. Thank you.